right. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Claire Payne. I'm the web librarian and liaison to the art department at Stony Brook University. And I'm so excited to welcome all of you to this first in the spring 2022 Art in Focus Tech Tuesday lecture series, where we're joined by Anne Spalter for a lecture on digital analog hybrids. So this lecture is co-sponsored by Stony Brook Southampton Library, the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, and the Southampton Arts Center in conjunction with the exhibition Expressionism, Digital and Beyond at the Southampton Arts Center. And I'll put that link in the chat in just a minute. And we would like to extend our thanks to Stony Brook's John H. Marburger III Fund for supporting the series. And while we used to host these lectures at the Southampton Campus Library, it's really great to see so many of you from all over the world in this virtual method over these last few years. So thank you for being here once again. Just a couple logistics. We will open with the lecture and then we will have time for Q&A from the audience at the end. But until then, we'll keep everyone muted. But you're welcome to ask questions via chat anytime that we'll address at the end, or you can raise your hand when we do get to that portion. So I would now like to welcome Helen Harrison, the Eugene V. and Claire E. Thaw Director of the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center and the coordinator of this series, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Claire. And it's a pleasure to be back with Art in Focus, and especially to be able to focus on what is really such a cutting edge contemporary exhibition organized by, and I see him on the Zoom here, Colin Goldberg, who coined the term Expressionism and who has really put together an amazing collection of work from all over the world. So those of you who do not have a chance to visit the Southampton Arts Center in person, please go on their website and you'll see lots of images. And the exhibition has been extended. I believe it still says June 4th on the website, but it's going to be extended through at least mid-July. So we're very happy about that. And I would like to introduce one of the pioneers of digital art, who's going to talk to us about digital analog hybrids, Anne Spalter. She is an academic pioneer who founded the original digital fine arts courses at Brown University and RISD in the 1990s. And is the author of the internationally taught textbook, The Computer in the Visual Arts, which was published in 1999. Her artistic process combines a consistent set of personal symbols with a hybrid arsenal of traditional mark-making methods and innovative digital tools. And a new body of work, further developed at a recent residency at MASS MoCA, combines artificial intelligence algorithms with oil paint and pastels. So I will now turn it over to Anne.
Thank you so much, Helen. And so excited to talk about this show, which Colin has been working on for so long. And I cannot even imagine how much work went into it on both of your parts, because it's really fantastic. So I urge everyone to go see it in Southampton. And if you can't, to definitely go see it online in all its 3D glory online. It's actually a very good experience, even online. And now I'm going to screen share. Hopefully now you're all seeing a big slide. Focus. This is the 3D view. So if you were in the show and seeing it, you'd see the big Expressionism manifesto there on the wall, and my work and others in the show. So definitely go online and see that. I'm going to tell you a bit about my background, how I got into making digital art, teaching courses on it, collecting it, and how I've gone back and forth between digital and analog, trying to put them together in different form factors, at different venues, and at different scales. And then how at the beginning of the pandemic, I became involved with artificial intelligence and making AI art, and how that work ended up in the Expressionism show, and a little more detail on those specific pieces. And then looking forward, how those of you who are artists, and even those of you who are not working as artists, can experiment with some of these same tools that I've been using. This image right here is tapestries, but they're based on digital works, which were NFTs, but those are just digital files. And these are jacquard woven tapestries that were made in China somewhere probably, but I sent out a digital file and got back these amazing things. So just an example of some digital to analog stuff. But to go back to the very beginning, I was an undergraduate painting major at the Rhode Island School of Design a long, long time ago, and was very happy doing my paintings and taking some math classes on the side, the way most people sort of take an art class on the side. And I ran out of what RISD called special studies credits, and I was told I couldn't take any more math classes. um, I went to the head of my division and I said, I just need to get another special studies credit. And shockingly to me, even to this day, he said, no, absolutely not. So I applied as a transfer student to Brown in order to take one more math class, but it turned out that I actually ended up majoring in math. I transferred to Brown, had a major in mathematics, kept my major in art, kept taking classes at RISD, even took on another major, an independent one that was sort of literature based. And in all of these, I didn't use the computer, and in fact was computer phobic, I would say. I didn't think it should be used to create artwork. I thought art was something you did with your hands, with physical material that you engaged with your body and interacted with. I also thought with all these cool degrees, I would go out and immediately get some kind of fantastic job. I went to the career office and explained that I'd majored in pure mathematics, and they said, that's great because now you can work as an actuary. And I had to go and look up what that was. And it turns out that is that can help you predict when people are going to die, so an insurance company can charge you the right amount for your life insurance. I definitely did not want to do that. It was the 80s, and I ended up working in banking. And that's actually a great career. I met a lot of fabulous, smart people. I was working in New York in my little cubicle, and I had a computer on my desk like everyone else. And as the months went by, I began more and more to experiment with programs that were visual. I had a precursor to Photoshop, I had page layout programs, Illustrator, and I began less and less to be doing my banking job and more to be creating artwork. And it became obvious to everyone that I should not be in banking. It was convenient to be able to do my art at work, and if my boss came by, I could click on Excel. But I realized this was not going to be my future, and I applied to graduate school and went back to RISD as a painting major. But I had enjoyed using the computer. I wanted to integrate it into my work, but I found that just the way I had had a negative reaction at the beginning to the computer, a lot of the faculty were not interested in seeing me use the computer in my work at all. In fact, I had critics who refused to look at my work if they knew I'd used the computer. So I did some experiments, and one of them was that I had some BFK paper, which is a beautiful paper for drawing or printmaking, and I forced some of that through my newly purchased laser printer, which was a very exciting purchase at the time, and it came out pretty well. Sort of looked like an etching, and I put it up on the crit wall with everyone else's work and said it was an etching, and got very good feedback. And then I revealed that it had been made on a computer, and the reaction was extremely negative. It really opened my eyes to how the perception could change just based on, you know, what you said about it, not even on what it actually looked like. So it was shocking to me at the time, and has been amazing to sort of go on this whole journey and see how things have changed between that day and today. I'm going to talk about that article later on. I kept experimenting with different techniques, and the digital and analog sort of entered at different parts of the process. So this is an actual etching using a light-based technique for etching the plate, where I did a digital image, printed it, and used it to expose the plate. So the ground was hardened based on where the image was, and then etched with acid and printed just as a regular etching. That was fine. Everyone just considered that to be an etching, and I didn't have any issue with it. So I enjoyed the analog world and realized you could sort of go back and forth and manipulate people's experience, sort of depending on where in the digital to analog process you ended up and decided where to display the work. As another example, in this one, I took a photograph on vacation, made a pastel drawing, then scanned that into the computer, and with a custom After Effects plugin, experimented a lot with different patterns and kaleidoscopic things. If it was on the screen, it sort of read really as digital art and got one reaction. When I made prints that were more sort of fine art prints, high-end inkjet prints, they seemed more acceptable to people as in the printmaking genre. I became interested in all of this. I really wanted to learn more about it. And I said, I'd like to study this and take a class on it. But there weren't any classes. The head of my painting department said, why don't you teach a class to your fellow graduate students? I was a little terrified at that prospect, but I said, all right. And you really learn something well when you have to teach it. I began researching and gathering together all the material that was out there, which wasn't that much at the time. Catalogs of important shows like Cybernetic Serendipity from 1968, curated by Jiza Reichart in London. Herbert Frankie's Computer Graphics, Computer Art, the books that were available, but began taking my own notes and creating my own handouts, which eventually became a book. It took me over 6 years to write it and sort of had everything that was in my brain at the time. History, technique, aesthetics, everything about digital art. And as part of that, I wanted to reach out to all the artists who had pioneered the field and find out what were the challenges they had faced and learn about their art. And Michael Spalter, who studied art history at Brown, said, these people, they're like the Impressionists. Galleries don't want to show their work. The Academy hates them. They all know each other. Their work is fantastic. They have decades, bodies of work. We should support them. We should see if we could collect some of this work. And we began slowly doing that, and now have probably the largest private art collection of early digital artwork, which is mostly plotter-based drawing. And a plotter is like a big etch-a-sketch that follows instructions from the computer and draws with often an ink pen. So the results are kind of analog. It's India ink on paper often, and very beautiful. The lines overlap each other, unlike inkjet printing, which is just sort of one line after another. The plotter lines overlap like a regular analog drawing, and the light bounces in and out and gives a beautiful effect. You can see all of our collection online at spalterdigital.com, and there'll be a number of links during this talk, and they'll be all listed at the end, and I'll have a QR code also at the end where you can get all of them. So because the history of digital art, especially until recently, was almost unknown and rarely included in art history courses or even in shows in museums, we wanted to make it accessible online and help educate people and provide a resource for students and curators. So we keep updating the website and adding more information and pieces to it. And some more examples of the challenges these artists face. Manfred Moore, who we collected his work for a long time, in 1972, he was giving a talk about his generative artwork, where he was exploring the cube much in the same spirit as Solowit, starting before Solowit, but getting no recognition for it. And someone in the audience threw an egg at him. So, it's one thing to disagree with someone's work or not enjoy the tools they're using. It's another thing to physically throw an object at them. Jean-Pierre Hebert, who sadly passed away recently, made these beautiful sensual works, also plotter-based. Couldn't find a gallery to represent his work. Finally, in one gallery interview, didn't say that he used the computer. They were super excited about the work, wanted to represent him. And kind of like my printer experience, when he revealed that they were done with a computer, was physically escorted out of the front door of the gallery. So these negative perceptions, these are some quotes from a fantastic book about the history of computer art by Grant Taylor, When the Machine Made Art, The Troubled History of Computer Art. The New York Times calling it a popular sideshow. Science fiction grotesqueries masquerading as art, art in America. The results are exceedingly poor and uninspiring. Really, negative. And it's much better today, but it hasn't completely changed. And this is a tweet from a wonderful and well-known artist, Kevin Abosh, from, let's say today's May 1st, from the Washington Post, saying NFTs are supposedly all the rage, but don't believe it because they are banal, tasteless, and pointlessly surreal. And it's even more surprising because NFTs are not an art form or a tool for making art or medium at all. It's literally a platform for exchanging art. So it's sort of like saying art you buy with a credit card is bad art. It literally doesn't make sense. But there's just a perception and reaction that's often negative for many reasons, which are discussed in this terrific book. One of my favorite artists we've collected for a long time is Vera Molnar. She turned 98 this year. And in a auction that I had the pleasure of co-curating at Sotheby's, we presented one of her traditional plotter-based works, and she created her first NFT. It was super exciting. It sold for more than any of her other work has ever sold for. And I hope to live to see the age of 98 and to have her level of intellectual openness and curiosity. It's very fun working with her. To go back to my own digital art story, I was exploring, I wrote this book. I found that one of the things that really detracted from viewing digital art, because it does have to be manifested in some form. So if you go see the show online or in person, you'll see a huge variety of materials and ways of viewing the art. A few things are on screens, but you'll see fabric and painting and a lot of different materials. You don't view the art by looking at the computer code. It has to become visible in some way. So even if you're just looking at it on a screen, it's becoming visible on that screen. Sometimes artists aren't really thinking about the way it's becoming visible. And a lot of, especially video art, you see it on a TV screen, you see the logo, you see wires coming out. It's very distracting, and there's a sort of semiotics of the TV or the monitor that gets in the way, I think, of viewing the art. So I was looking for ways of removing that from the visual equation by making things that were more sculptural. So in this work, I used small battery-powered screens, first encasing them in resin, and then working with a prototyping company. We ended up with a two-part acrylic mold with an injection molded piece in the back for the ports. And I think this has video. There we go. So it plays video inside. And because it's two-part, you could fix the screen if it breaks. And you can put it on a desktop or a bookcase. And it's battery powered, so it doesn't have a cord coming out of it at all. And it just brings it into a different realm. And it made it much easier for people to collect. They didn't have to be digital art collectors or video art collectors. Similarly, I made pieces that hung on the wall like a screen but weren't square. And this is large, it's 5 feet in diameter, and also had the video part smaller, which helped with, if you have a big screen with moving images and it's bright, it's very physiologically distracting. You can't really have that in your space, like in your living room, going on all the time, because your eye is constantly drawn to it. So this was a way to have video art that you could live with in your home. I also have been experimenting with large-scale installations where you're immersed in a space and less focused on sort of seeing something in a gallery context. This was a Spring Break Art Show in 2016, the lobby of the old post office building in New York with many square feet of wallpaper based on footage I shot out of a helicopter over New York. Many small screens of video, some large ones, and canvas prints. And the idea is just an immersive experience where you're not thinking about is it digital or analog, but just what is the visual experience that you're in. And Vacation Planet, which has large inflatable spheres with imagery based on photographs that I took in Miami. And this was installed in 2020 in Brooklyn. And the concept was that you're walking around, it's New York, it was January and February of 2020, cold and gray in New York. You'd come into this warm, tropical feeling, kind of surrealistic outer space, but definitely tropical and warm and inviting, and get a little break from the New York winter. So we rented palm trees and Adirondack chairs and put power strips in there, and you could come in and work on your computer. So it was digital, but because of the big sculptural forms and kind of happy feeling of it. It didn't have a technological vibe to it. The pandemic hit right after that. That was the last show that ran its full length in that space. I stopped being able to do shows in galleries or do big installations. Everyone was inside. A friend of mine posted a cool piece of this AI art and had a link to beta test something. And I said, what the heck is that? It looks so interesting. We had collected work from an artist who had done work with machine learning. Harold Cohen, who made a program called Aaron that created his art for him based on rules that he programmed into it. But that program didn't learn anyone else's art, and he didn't have any sort of proteges that worked with him to continue his work. So it kind of petered out. This new software that my friend was using was based on very recent research, really starting in 2014 with an amazing paper written by a gentleman named Ian Goodfellow on what are called generative adversarial networks, which sounds complicated, but it's not that hard to explain. And I'm going to do so with some pictures. You start out with some image sets, and the program I was using is called Playform. And again, all these links are going to be at the end. I started out with these images of circular artworks that I had created myself and airplane images that I found on the web. And I've been obsessed with airplanes forever, so they're just, you know, images I'd always used in my artwork. And the adversarial part is the AI software. There's a generator, and it's generating something, and it's trying to learn how to make images that look like the ones in that second set. And there's a discriminator or sort of judgment part. That's the adversarial part. And each cycle it goes through, there's a generation, and then the sort of judgment part says, do these look like the images that I want in the second set? So it runs through a cycle, it says, do these look like airplanes? If it goes no, it runs through them again and keeps doing that over and over again, getting closer and closer to making things that look, in this case, like airplanes. So you can see this happening. It goes through this cycle 10 times. Everything's getting bluer. It's still circular, but it's beginning to break down a little bit. It goes through it 38 times, and you begin to see some of the kind of airplane body forms appearing and the clouds. Goes through it 80 times, and you can see like a real airplane shape has come in. And then 250 iterations, which is a computer science word for, you know, a cycle or another time through the whole process. And I got these incredibly wacky things. I thought they were very cool compositions that I would have been excited to make. I didn't make them, but I would have been thrilled if I had made them. They didn't look like airplanes to me, so it wasn't really successful in terms of, you know, an AI computer science project. But it was successful to me in terms of its artistic, you know, output. But they were very low resolution. They came out, it was only 256 pixels across, which is like a little blurry postage stamp, really. So I went back to my art school training and rendered it really as a pastel drawing. And I was able to make that any size I wanted to, in this case, and the ones that you see in the show in Southampton are 20 inches by 20 inches. And that's the 3D view. And this is my picture that I took at the opening. And again, all these links are going to be at the end. So this is just a close-up of the pieces that are in the show. And the colors are a little different because, you know, I pastels, but I stuck, you know, very closely really to the compositions. And I went through this same process at my residency at MASS MoCA in 2019. So you can see I printed out the compositions, and they're really like kind of blurry and weird. And then I sized them with a gel medium, stuck them up on the wall, and just painted over them and made little paintings that were 10 by 10. And I showed these at a Spring Break art show in March of 2020. And I've been at Spring Break Art Fair, which is a fantastic, fun art fair in New York. You should definitely attend if you can. I've been in this art fair many times, and usually I sell one or two things, not a lot, and I'm almost always showing new media and digital work. this year when I showed oil paintings, I sold out my whole room. So just another testament to what people conceive of as fine art and how it's perceived versus digital artwork, for better or worse. And a final example of that, which kind of brings together all the perceptions and a little bit behind the scenes of doing some of these large scale installations. This was planning for a big inflatable piece, like the big spheres, but more complicated. Started out with one of these little AI compositions, made a pastel drawing, worked with an artist to do a 3D rendering, and I was waiting to find out if I'd been accepted to Spring Break LA. Didn't find out until only a few weeks before the fair was supposed to open. And I called my inflatables production house in Canada, and I said, it's great, I got in, and here's a picture of what I want. I actually sent a little video, and they said, and that looks fabulous, so we cannot produce that, it's way too complicated. And I was like, oh crap, I started calling places in LA, and most of them said we can't produce it, or we can't produce it in that time frame. Called 14 places. 2 said they could produce it in the time frame that I had. One was moderately expensive and one was frighteningly expensive, and worked with Jeff Koons, and and I said thank you, but no thanks. And I told the other place, go ahead um, and make it. But then I called back the first place and I said, I don't understand how the pricing is so different. And they said, we don't understand what you're going to get for what you're going to pay from the other place. Ask for a rendering before you send the money. And about 9 o'clock at night, about a week later, I got this picture, and I completely panicked, and I thought I was going to have to pull out of the art fair because it didn't look to me anything like my project. And the next morning, I called up the expensive place and I said, please take my money. And they said, we don't even know if we can make it now anymore. But they took pity on me, and they shipped it in a box to my hotel. I had to bring it to the art fair, install it. So I didn't see it literally until I inflated it in the art fair. But I thought it looked really good. It actually looked really like the 3D model. So every big installation pretty much has some version of that story. They've worked out in the end, but I've never known if they will or not. So but that was like a whole journey back and forth, also from digital to analog, to digital and back to analog. These GAN systems can also be used to create video, and this was shown last month in LA at Vellum LA on a terrific screen, a very fine pitch LED screen for those of you into those nerdly things. Another type of AI, which you probably have used in apps on your phone, is called style transfer. It's often used to make sort of cheesy things where you have a photo and you make it look like it was painted by Van Gogh or something. In this case, I tried to use that more artistically with a photo I took on vacation and my own pastel drawing and another artwork I had done, and just applying those styles. And this approach doesn't change the composition of the first thing you do. It just changes the style. And it can be useful, but it's more specific. But what I've been using recently, and is pretty much as fantastic as it sounds, is something called text to image. So here's examples of working on it. I was working on a piece for a fundraiser for Ukraine. And you literally type in a phrase called a prompt, and you get back an entire image. So I was working with lighthouses, which are a common symbol in my artwork. I had been reading an article about time crystals. I put in the word Ukraine because that was the focus of the work. Science fiction as sort of a modifier for the vibe of the piece. And you can see that each time the prompt changes slightly, the composition also changes slightly. And the final work is a combination of those compositions. And I did do it as an NFT because then when it was purchased, the money could go directly to Ukraine's government NFT wallet. And 6 of those pieces are now up at a museum show in Vermont at the Brattleboro Museum of Art. And because it's very hard to photograph there, they'll show these directly So also working with a custom AI pipeline instead of just the web-based things. With this, we were able to change the text prompts as the piece was being made. And that's how we got these chapters of the different seasons. So spring had those birds, and then entering the word fall, changed them into leaves, and then adding the word winter brought in snow. And through this, we were also able to create different types of motion. So this piece is all kind of just moving to the right. But in other pieces, we are able to do rotation, zooming. And the next piece has sound, so I won't talk over it, but you can see a lot of different types of motion being used in it. So here you can see it zooms sometimes, it moves from left to right, and all those instructions are entered as it's being created. And the video is done by having a text prompt, making an image, and then applying the text prompt to that image to get the next frame of the video. And interestingly, the clocks appeared even though time is not mentioned, and the word warp appears even though the word warp is not in the prompts. And the word home came in, even though the word home is not in the prompts. So it's constant surprise working with AI that's really fun, and it's like working with sort of a strange studio partner. It was fantastic to wake up one morning and be in the New York Times, and that was because of having this piece in an auction at Sotheby's, and because of it being an NFT as well. And as you all know, NFTs have gotten a lot of press attention, which may be good or bad, but has been fantastic for the digital arts and digital artists. Just like the whole analog versus digital thing, it's just helped with the perception of digital art, bringing it to the attention of people who didn't know it existed. I've had people say to me, oh, I didn't know there was digital art before NFTs. So it's helped bring the whole history of digital art to many people's attention, and continue with our efforts to integrate it into the rest of art history. The text to image process, it seems so magical. It's a little less magical than it seems, but still pretty fantastical. It works by accessing a research database called ImageNet that has over 14 million images in it, classified into all these different object categories. And interestingly, I think from a technical point of view, but also from an artistic point of view, the images were all tagged by hand by human beings, hired by Mechanical Turk, Amazon's Mechanical Turk service. So they're just people like drawing, I guess, boxes around objects in an image, or saying like this picture has, in my case, a spaceship in it. So I wanted to know what images were being called up in ImageNet to make my spaceship artwork. So we actually looked inside it, and a little bit disappointingly, from the 14 million images, only 477 actually have spaceships in them. And they're all culled from the web, process called scraping, between 2012 and 2017. So, you know, Elon Musk's starships are not in it. A lot of Starship Enterprises in it. It kind of explains the look of some of the things that you get. So I'm very into Carl Jung and the collective unconscious, and I sort of think of ImageNet as our culture's like collective unconscious that this AI process is tapping into. But it's a very specific cultural unconscious actually that it's using, which brings me to some of the issues of AI and AI artwork. You don't necessarily know exactly what AI is doing, and a lot of it depends on what data you are feeding it, what databases are it's tapping into. You know, so if I had my own databases of spaceships, the artwork would look very different. Also, I used airplane images that I just found online. I didn't get copyright permission to use them because you can't tell that I use them in my artwork, but there's no clear legal ruling about any of that. Some of the output that's coming out now is so startling that I think there are issues about originality and authorship that come up with AI, and issues with biases when databases are drawn on that cause AI to have, you know, racism and sexism in its output. So there are many things that come up that have to do with art and issues beyond it. Um, and issues also for artists that may be put out of work because of art photographs or illustrations that can be literally created by someone typing in a sentence. So this astronaut riding on a horse was created by someone typing in astronaut riding on a horse in a photorealistic style. That's all someone had to type to generate this image. Could be good or bad. Um, a cool thing is that you can try all these yourself and also see a lot of examples. Processing is a programming language but aimed at artists to create generative artwork of the type that we collect. Wombo is a free app that's on your phone and now desktop that does text to image artwork. Night Cafe and Studio and Playform are the programs I was discussing. This does not exist, makes faces and cats and other things with the GAN process, and they're very realistic. It's pretty interesting. And then there's a whole nother list of AI generation tools, and of course the Expressionism show. And if you scan the code, you can get all these links immediately on your phone. And looking forward, what does all this mean? These new ways of making images and exchanging images. We didn't talk about NFTs, but I know there were some questions, so I'm happy to answer questions or explain NFTs if anyone is interested. I think mostly it's very positive, and that they create ways of expanding what some theoreticians call supermarket of images or of the visible, that there's more ways to make images and share images and a larger visual economy. NFTs create new ways to support artists, and there's new ways of mixing digital and analog to make phygital worlds. So I think it just creates a bigger visual marketplace, and that even people who are not working as artists will be creating visual and using them in their workplace. And that is everything. Thank you so much. I'll leave that up in case anyone wants to scan it.
Well, thank you, Anne. You gave us the Cook's tour, going right back to the 1970s, which is wonderful. I think the fact that you've been collecting this over such a long period of time shows you the breadth of material that's available and how different technologies can give different results that have that quote unquote fine art look, and then others that have a much more technological look. You use the term generative.
Yep.
Can you define that? What does that mean?
Artwork that's created with a set of rules called an algorithm that usually introduces some element of chance or variation that the artist isn't completely in control of.
Mhm.
So often the early work has some sort of, you see a lot of geometric shapes or like some of our work has for instance, a square, but then it's going to rotate in ways that are unpredictable. So sort of like the AI, where something happens that you don't quite control, it brings in some unexpected element, and then the artist can create a number of images based on a generative code and select the ones that they resonate with and have found, represent their artwork.
Mhm. Okay, I'm looking in the chat, and
Yeah, I see there are a whole bunch of
a
questions.
bunch of, well, there are a lot of people who say wonderful, awesome, and other things that are very positive. And then there are links, of course, anyone who wants to get some of the information through the links. We've also got a comment from Darcy Gerbog, who said, I was teaching computer art courses
Yeah,
at
I could have taken her
MI.
class,
Back,
and yeah, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, in starting in 1980. So there are a few people out there. You mentioned Harold Cohen and other artists who were using computers in a creative way. So it isn't something that just happened overnight, but it's proliferated, I think, because of the internet. Which of course there was no internet back in 1980. Let's see what else we have
Yeah,
here.
and like Verneda Lights, that time was extrapolated from the use of seasons. We didn't use the word seasons.
When you to make that image. Yeah.
Yeah, but from something in there, maybe. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
From something though, it definitely
Just
came from something,
looking
obviously.
here. Playform. So Patrick is mentioning that Playform is a great platform that allows artists to get into machine learning without digging into a bunch of code. Yeah, that would stymie me, all right.
Me as well.
And then Renata mentions that time was extrapolated from the use of seasons in the art prompt. So is that, and also she says artists must remain mindful of copyright issues and not rely on whether or not they think the image is consumed in the art making process looks recognizable within the end product. I mean, there is such a thing as fair use. And one of the issues that's come up in recent litigation is how much of a change has been made, how recognizable or unrecognizable is it from the original? To what extent does it mimic the original? And that seems to be like the point at which if it goes into unrecognizability, then it's sort of out of copyright and the artist is using it, has fair use. And
Yeah,
satire as well. If something is parodied or lampooned, that's also fair use. But sometimes people take things very directly, and Andy Warhol used to go to court regularly over this. But the idea that the imagery is out there on the internet, so it's fair game, is a real problem.
it is, because you could just say, I don't want my image in your image database, and I don't care what you're doing with it, and don't use it. I think artists should have that right.
Okay, does anybody else want to put up a hand? Oh, yes, I see Roz, you have your hand up. So maybe Claire, can you unmute Roz? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Helen. Fascinating. Thank you. Wonderful talk. Two things. Watching AI, I'm fascinated by the strangeness and sort of truth to it. And it seems, don't you feel in a way, Anne, even though there is a kind of, you're working with something else, a variable, but still it's the artist's eye at work. Don't you feel like making the choices as you keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like it's my artwork. And I didn't show you all the things that went terribly wrong and looked like crap, That would have been a really long talk.
Well, I love the stories, I have to say, shipping things that you talked about, your inflatable. I mean, that's all part of being an artist, and it's business and it's all sorts of things. So I appreciate that. The other thing, when you were just talking about we were talking about other artists' work. I know within my own works that I call diamondscapes, they're a new kind of scape. I almost compare them to like the Gutenberg press of words where we are right now. And I like the fact that you thought that artists should have a say in it. And I think it would be maybe you can speak to that. I know for myself, I think it's I think it's very important that we source. You know, I have like a bibliography in all my Diamondscapes, and it goes out to, because I don't have to draw the cat. I don't have to. I ask people, I've contacted people in Australia sometimes, said, oh, I'd like to use this little DNA matrix, and then they write back, and then I source them. So I just, if you can speak to that a little bit, I know I've been thinking about that a lot, and I think it makes it a stronger, bigger world.
Yeah, I mean, do not have an answer to that. So ImageNet has 14 million images, and they're from the web. And it's a research database, and they did not get copyright permission for any of the images, and they say that. And they actually have a form, so you could go to ImageNet and you can have your image removed if you don't want it in there.
Yeah,
But
but to
every
your
time
point,
you use text to
you should
image,
have your
you're using
name
that
with it.
database.
Well, that's also
So-
the opt-out factor, is that you're not opting in, you have to opt out. And I think that's very questionable.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no commercial right to use ImageNet at all. And but every time you make an image with text to image, which people are doing everywhere now, you're using all that image data.
Oh man,
everyone's
I
using
think that
same
opens up a whole
database.
another conversation where we
It's
do
wild. It's
source.
wild. And what about all those people that were paid minimum wage tagging images in some sort of like crazy image sweatshop work
Yes.
thing? Like, it's so bananas.
Now I see Lisa has her hand up, so maybe Claire can unmute her. You're not unmuted yet, Lisa. Lisa,
Yes.
you're not. There you go.
Okay. Very interesting talk. I'm so glad that I tuned in from California. I wish I could come see the show. How long is the show up in Southampton?
At least until mid-July. We don't have a final date. It was scheduled to close June 4th, but they're extending it for at least a month.
Oh, good, good, good. And then you can also see you can see it on a virtual tour as well.
Right.
I particularly liked, because I showed a video of some digital art that I made, mostly just starting out with iMovie, and then I collaborated with a digital artist, and I had it at Guildhall on a tiny screen. And it just didn't look good, again, because of the wires and all that. So I really loved the polymer, what you came up with as far as the sculpture and putting the digital screen in that. And then as far as generative art, I'm coming up with events now that have to do with wellness and creativity. And I'm thinking of offering people the opportunity to make digital art from some of my own images that can be theirs as part of the experience. So I'm learning about generative art, and I think it's a great to maybe do that in an installation somehow.
Yeah, and it's a nice way for people to make art who don't have a lot of art training.
Yeah.
Because you get results right away. It's super fun.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I get back east, I'll contact you and invite you to my event.
Sure. And then I saw Colin has a question in there that I definitely want to answer about Expressionism's role in the larger art historical context. Because one of the problems, and Grant Taylor writes about this in his book, is many of the original shows of computer art mixed together fine artists working with the computer and scientists doing experiments and technologists. And that was because everyone had to, go to some technological place to have access to the computers, or they had to work with programmers. Artists didn't know how to program. And it was kind of all mixed together. So when an art critic came by, they were sort of overwhelmed with all this material at once. So they might see something done by an artist and something done by a scientist who was really just experimenting and didn't even think of themselves as an artist. But it would be confusing to an art critic. So Expressionism, my understanding, a part of it anyway, is to really be about making artwork, emotively important, fine artwork, and not computer graphics and video games and other things that you do with the computer, because there's a lot of visual things you can do with the computer. So I think it's important in that way because it distinguishes sort of scientific and technological experimentation from artwork.
Right. Colin, did you have a comment?
No, that was pretty much the question. I'd put it in the chat, but I think it's interesting to hear, Anne's sort of take on Expressionism, given that she's a longtime collector and practitioner. So, I think it might allow her to see it within a larger context. And I think I definitely identify with a lot of the stories she told about gallerists and other people sort of, once they hear that a computer is involved, the reaction completely changes. And that was definitely one of my motivators in trying to develop Texpressionism into sort of an online community or other just as a project, and finding that type of identification with others, I think is a real binding factor that's made this really important to me personally, and enjoyable.
Well, I think we can all agree that you've really taken this to a whole other level with this exhibition and with the whole concept. Now, I see Cynthia has her hand up, and so does Michael, but Cynthia was first. So there you go. Cynthia, you're unmuted, I think. There you go.
Yes, hello everyone, and hello from Rhode Island. Anne, wonderful presentation. I learned so much about generative art, and I appreciate your sharing that. It seems to me that from what I've heard about Playform, that perhaps sidesteps the issue of copyright, because in Playform, don't you put your own images in and then it generates something from that, or am I incorrect about it?
You can put in whatever images you want. So there are databases out there. I put in images of airplanes that I found on the web. So theoretically, I could have asked for permission to use those images. I don't think anyone can tell what images I used in my pastel drawing. So I actually do not think that that's an issue.
Yeah,
I
and I
challenge
think,
anyone to sue me over the use of those images.
yeah,
But
well,
I do think there are issues out there. So that's
yeah.
why I bring it up.
And I also think when you think of collagists, analog collagists, they use magazine images, photographs, and I'm sure some of those things are copyrighted, but they employ them in such a way that they make a larger work that isn't anything like. So I think that issue of it does change enough that it's unrecognizable to the original is an important point. My second question to you is, you talked about in one of your video pieces that you took the images, and I guess they were the highway images. How did you get it from stills to the video? What software did you use?
The one with the sound, the
Yes,
video with the sound.
yes.
So that was all text to image. So I didn't give it any imagery. I only typed in words.
Mm-hmm.
And the words were actually from the Laurie Anderson song, Big Science 2, where she has the size of it all, the highways, the networks and the highways and the mall. So
Okay.
that was most of the text prompt. And then it makes an image. And then the program gives that prompt, it runs it on the image that it made. So it makes another image that's slightly different. And then it takes that image and it runs the same text prompt on it. It makes another image that's a little bit different and puts all those images together to make the video.
So it creates the video. The program creates the video.
That was made with custom programming, working with a programmer.
Okay. All right.
So, but it's just running that text prompt over and over again, and then changing it slightly to get like that whole warp section in the middle had slightly different text.
Okay, so it wasn't that the program that you initially used to create text to image ended up creating the video. You went on to something else.
Yeah, but you could, yes. But it's the same process. It's just taking the result of text to image and running it again to get another frame. So it's doing it over and over again, using the results of the first time to create the next frame of the video.
So theoretically, you could take that series of still images, if you will, and put them into a software like Final Cut or iMovie.
Yeah, no, that's exactly. Actually, all we did was create a series of still images, and then I put them into After Effects.
Okay.
And Michael, we have you.
Hi, Anne. Good to see you, and thank you for your presentation. So for me, I've had to deal with similar issues in the past coming from the game industry in terms of how technology has advanced and issues of copyright and all of that. I was curious though, from your standpoint, a lot of the current software right now, ones that I use as well, there's a very strong signature of which software package you're using. And I find that frustrating to some degree because I kind of want to break free from that. And I don't want somebody to look and say, oh, you use Playform. Oh, or you use this GAN software. So I'm kind of curious from your standpoint, how you deal with that. And I saw, obviously you have a natural talent for traditional painting as well. So that's a positive, I guess. But I was curious about, is that something you face or something you look at and how you judge that for your own work?
Yeah, I think there is a sameness, and there's a sameness to a lot of the AI art. If you go on Twitter, you'll see a lot of AI art that all looks the same. Especially when someone put a comment, Diana, about Disco Diffusion, which is a type of text-to-image AI art. It's getting more and more realistic and more the same looking. So there's a ton of work that all looks like kind of mediocre sci-fi illustration, and it all looks the same. I think if you work with the tool enough though, and you're working with it sort of in your practice towards some sort of goal for yourself, that it does end up looking more different eventually, but it is a problem. It is a problem. You can tell, I think, which of my works I made with Playform and which I didn't. So it does have that. If you do more custom things, like the longer videos, which has sort of the chapters and the narrative, then it does look a little bit different. Using your own custom databases can help, because then you don't have only spaceships in a 5-year period that ImageNet collected.
So
Well, thank you.
Patrick's got a question too. Patrick, are you there? All right.
I'm there. I apologize. I'm not going to go visual. But anyway, Anne, thanks for the talk, and good to see everybody from the Expressionism gang, especially Colin, and of course my dear Nagin. And
And Nagin asked about the slides, but I don't know if she knows that it's all recorded.
there we go.
Yeah, I know.
Everything.
Hello, everyone.
So, and she's coming in from Tehran, Iran. So, so the one thing I was thinking about here is that this is an issue that you're mentioning, the idea of the traditional materiality and theatricality of art, and versus that of the digital. In other words, a lot of artists have the hardest time selling a digital print, unless it's maybe on extremely funny, if it's on extremely good rag paper, there's still that materiality with that. So I think the one thing, especially seeing the show that you did at the St. Kate in Milwaukee, the idea of using oil and pastel, and then I also do jacquards as well, and you have one. And so what happens is the matter that there's something about the and also Nagin's work in the Expressionist show, that's actually this large fabric piece. It's just the idea there's something really that the art world is it is just so invested with this materiality, isn't it? And do you think this is a problem, or do you think this is something that we as artists basically you could say need to get over? But the thing, I think what happens is that maybe we need maybe it's a reaching out and bridge building to the conventional collectors and that sort of thing. What do you think?
I mean, I hope people will become educated and understand that a plotter drawing is an amazing thing and should be just as valuable as an oil painting, or that you can buy video artwork and have a certificate of authenticity. I think it's understanding the medium and not being put off by the fact that a computer was involved. But I mean,
Also, I think that there's a question of individuality, that an oil painting, there's only one of it. You can take a photograph of it, you could make a copy of it, but it is a quote unquote original work of art. This is even a problem just in the print world, that prints are made in editions. So they're multiples, they're not just one of them. And I
Sure.
think that is also a problem with photography. It's also a problem with computer art because it's duplicatable.
Yeah, so I guess what happens is that, I mean, there are some people like Tina Rivers, Ryan, and Chris John Paul have been talking about this. You know, the idea of what is being solved by the NFT. In other words, the notion of this provenance, this, you know, this individuality of the digital work, therefore giving it kind of a grounding in the physical world. And maybe that's what's been needed.
it's done something, because certainly people don't seem to be afraid of spending a lot of money on NFTs in a way that they have not on previous digital artwork.
Yes, it's an interesting conundrum, but I'm afraid we're out of time. It's now a little bit after 7, and I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up. But this is clearly something that we could be talking about more, and I hope that we will talk more about other issues with Texpressionism on the 17th, when Colin will come front and center, and his focus will be, what the heck is Texpressionism? So please come back and join us for that. And thank you all very much. Thank you, Claire, for hosting, and hope to see you in 2 weeks on Tech Tuesday.